I spy with my little eyes two spies who despise each other. This is Sega Masters. We're going old school in today's episode of Sega Masters, which is actually somewhat ironic given that we've reached October of 1988 and thus about to enter what is essentially a critical time for Sega's console in its valiant battle against the ever-growing Nintendo juggernaut. Many gaming historians consider the 1988 holiday season to be the peak period of the Master System's run in the US. It's not hard to see why, as Sega and Tonka would bring out some of the console's best remembered cartridges during the fall months, though these range from all-time greats to a few disappointments. The first game we're going to look at from that period, however, is something of a blast from the past in Spy vs. Spy, a port of a computer game from way back in 1984. And as you might have guessed by the title, it is inspired by the comic strip that's no doubt familiar to readers of the long-running Mad magazine. Created by exiled Cuban cartoonist Antonio Prohias, the comic debuted in January 1961 and chronicles the ongoing war between the white spy and the black spy, who are always trying to entrap, outwit, or destroy each other in slapstick fashion. The strip became a favorite of readers of the magazine and continues to this day, with the spies going on to appear in several other forms of media as well. Naturally, video games were not excluded, as First Star Software crafted a computer title based on the duo's Antics, which was released in the fall of 1984 across the different platforms. Like many games at the time, it was a simple arcade-style romp, yet it was apparently popular enough to spawn a pair of sequels. Several years later, the Spy vs. Spy game was brought to the console world. In fact, conversions of the game would be released on the Master System and the NES. Another of the rare games to appear on both of the competing 8-bit platforms. Oddly enough, Sega's version was originally released for the Mark III in Japan in 1986 on a Sega card. And not only did their port have to wait 2 more years until finally appearing for the Master System in the States, it was even kept on the Sega card format even though Sega had all but abandoned that obsolete storage medium by 1988. And don't ask me why the card has a red spy on its label. Upon starting the game, you're greeted with this options menu that allows you to choose the number of players, the difficulty level in the solo mode, and any of the game's 8 levels to start from. Once the game begins, we find the two spies both infiltrating an embassy of some sort, racing to retrieve some supposedly important items that are hidden among a series of interconnected rooms, then make their escape before their opposite colored counterpart, all within a given time limit. Player 1 takes the role of the white spy, while the black spy can be controlled by a second human player or the CPU, and the split screens allow the two of them to move throughout the building independently from each other. For those wondering, the female gray spy who occasionally appeared in the comic strip is not present. The action mainly consists of the rivals making their way through the different rooms and investigating the furniture for a key, a bag of money, a passport, and some secret documents. At the beginning, you can only hold one item at a time, which requires you to do some juggling of the objects until you obtain the briefcase, which allows you to carry all the prizes at once. During your scavenger hunt, you have a few opportunities to impede your opponent's progress, and one method is setting up booby traps. The game's interface, known as the Trapulator, offers you a few destructive devices to rig doors and certain objects with, but the somewhat clunky controls force you to constantly hit button 1 to activate the Trapulator and select which trap you want to use, pausing yourself in the process. Then you have to try to deposit it in the furniture or door you're bugging, and the controls make that a bit challenging as well. After that, you just hope your rival trips the trap, which will kill him instantly, though only temporary. A spy that gets knocked off will be penalized some time while being forced to wait to regenerate, plus any item he was carrying is hidden in the room he perished in, basically up for grabs. Of course, you can easily trigger a trap you set yourself by mistake, taking yourself out in the process. Most of the traps do have a remedy to nullify it, which can be found on the coat racks and the white boxes lining the walls. Only the time bomb has no way to disarm it, you just have to hurry back out of the room before it goes off. Thing is, the split screens let each player watch what the other is up to, with no way to prevent this blatant peeking. Thus you can easily see where your opponent is setting a trap up and simply avoid the object in question. In addition, the Trapulator allows you to access the in-game map, letting you chart your route and see where things might be found. If the two of you should happen to end up in the same room, you can engage each other in hand-to-hand combat trying to knock the other guy out, though it's limited to punching and kicking each other since the melee weapons from the other versions are missing in this Sega port. Once you have obtained all 4 items in the briefcase, you then need to slip out the exit door, which is marked by the 2 jets, before the timer expires. Successfully escape from the embassy, and you're treated to the short clip of your victorious spy making his getaway at the airport. You then get a moment to celebrate your victory before advancing to the next level to do the same thing all over again. Of course, there's nothing to stop your opponent from simply camping out by the exit door to ambush you and knock you off at the last minute, enabling him to steal your stuff and claim victory in the cheapest fashion possible. And that's pretty much all there is to Spy vs. Spy, just searching for the MacGuffins and beating each other up until the round concludes. The rather limited action and lack of depth gets boring before too long, and the insane amount of rooms you have to work through in the later levels only add to the tedium. The CPU opponent is of 2 extremes, laughably incompetent on the easy setting or brutally unbeatable on the high setting. This is definitely a game that's best enjoyed with 2 players since beating up a buddy is always much more satisfying, even with the cheapness that can be exploited. But the game's main issue is how it keeps reminding you of its origins every second. It's essentially the same program people played on their Commodore 64s back in 1984. It must have felt rather antiquated compared to the more complex titles Nintendo and even Sega themselves were pumping out for their consoles during the same period. In fact, it seems Sega tried a little too hard to make Spy vs. Spy look and play just like the computer original, and they didn't even upgrade their port with any new features or additions in the slightest. For comparison's sake, here's Kemco's version of Spy vs. Spy on the NES, which was released in the US around the same time. While it shares some of the same criticisms as its Master System counterpart, at least some effort was made to help it work better on a console, such as doing away with the trapulator entirely to allow bigger viewing areas for the gameplay and thus larger graphics. They also streamlined the controls, which feel a bit smoother. On the Master System, despite the room sporting brighter colors, the characters and object sprites are nearly microscopic since the in-game action is confined to the relatively small windows on the left side, due to the interface taking up most of the screen. The catchy background theme from the computer and NES versions has also been replaced by a rather bland and annoying tune, along with some ear-piercing sound effects which will have you reaching for the mute button. So Spy vs. Spy isn't a terrible game overall. In fact, it can be a decent time waster for those who enjoy the comics, and a nice option for 2-player deathmatches. But its somewhat dated and repetitious gameplay makes it feel too much like a relic from an era that was long gone by 1988. It makes you wonder why Sega even bothered releasing it when they did, since a 4-year-old computer title wasn't going to be any sort of effective weapon against Nintendo. If you really want to play this game, I'd recommend the slightly better NES version. Either way, this is one espionage war you probably won't be participating in for very long.